You know, for years, we've all heard the same story. Iran's regime is about to collapse any day now. But what if that's not the right way to look at it? A really fascinating analysis suggests there's a new, much more subtle strategy being waged. A long game of internal erosion, not a big, flashy revolution. So let's get into it.
I mean, it's a perfectly fair question, right? We see these headlines all the time about massive protests, crippling sanctions, and the assumption is always that the end must be just around the corner. And yet here we are. The regime is still standing. So what are we all missing? Why hasn't the big collapse everyone keeps expecting actually happened?
So before we can really dig into this new shadow war, we have to understand why the old strategy, basically just sitting back and waiting for the regime to implode, was a dead end. And it all comes down to understanding what makes the regime so resilient in the first place.
Okay, so it really boils down to three main pillars holding the whole thing up. First, you've got the security apparatus. Think of the incredibly powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They are just dominant. Second, all the key government institutions are still fiercely loyal to the top leadership. And third, you can't ignore their base of popular support. It might be shrinking, but it's still solid. The bottom line, as long as those at the top are all on the same page, a total collapse from within, it's just not very likely.
So, because the regime is so tough to crack, its opponents had to go back to the drawing board. They had to rethink everything. And this is where we see a huge pivot, a move away from this dream of a quick takedown and towards something much, much more patient, something indirect.
So why the big shift in strategy? Well, it comes down to a few really big risks. For one, a direct military strike is just way too dangerous. For another, nobody, and I mean nobody, has a good plan for what would happen the day after the regime fell. And then there's the biggest fear of all, kicking off a massive war that engulfs the whole region. Direct attacks were simply off the table. It was time for a completely new playbook.
And this right here, this is the absolute heart of the new strategy. The primary objective has totally changed from what most of us have always assumed it was.
Okay, so if the goal isn't regime change anymore, what is it? What are they trying to do?
The name of the game is attrition. And look, don't think of this as a boxing match where you're looking for one big knockout punch. No, this is more like a marathon. The goal here is to just slowly, methodically wear down Iran's power, drain its money, and just exhaust its will to fight, all from the inside.
So how do you actually wage a war of attrition like this? Well, you find your opponent's internal weak spots, their fault lines, and you press on them hard. And this is where it gets really clever, almost ironic, actually. This new strategy takes Iran's own signature foreign policy and turns it right back against them.
See, for decades, Iran has mastered something called forward defense. Basically, the whole idea is to use proxy groups to project power in other countries, places like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. Why? It lets them fight their battles way over there, so they don't have to fight them in their own backyard.
And here's the twist. Opponents are now taking that exact same forward defense logic and flipping it. They're turning it inward, on Iran, supporting groups inside Iran's own borders. It's like creating a siege from within, forcing the regime to put out fires at home instead of projecting power abroad.
All right, so where exactly are they applying this pressure? First up, we've got Khuzestan province in the southwest. This is a region with a big Arab population that has a long, long history of feeling ignored by the government. That makes it really fertile ground for unrest. Then, if you look to the west, you've got the Kurdish regions. Now, this isn't about starting something new. It's about pouring gasoline on an already burning fire, backing militant groups that have been fighting their own battle for autonomy for a very long time. And finally, we have what's probably the most explosive pressure point of them all, Sistan-Baluchistan, way out in the southeast. It's home to a really potent insurgency among the Baloch people.
This area, Sistan-Baluchistan, is so critical to this whole strategy that we've got to zoom in on it. It's pretty much a perfect case study of how this proxy warfare of attrition actually works on the ground.
You could say it's the perfect storm for this kind of operation. You've got these long, porous borders with Pakistan and Afghanistan, so it's easy to move people and weapons around. The central government's grip on the area is pretty weak. It's also a massive hub for smuggling. And maybe most important of all, the local Baloch people feel deeply alienated from the state. It's this potent mix of identity, money, and opportunity.
And this is fascinating. Check this out. The main insurgent group there used to be called Jaishul Adl. They've rebranded. Now they call themselves the People's Fighters Front.
And this is way more than just a name change. It's a massive strategic pivot from being a narrowly focused religious group to a much broader secular nationalist one. And why would they do that? To sound more legitimate, to get money from supporters abroad, and, well, to look a lot more appealing to potential backers in the West.
And this is the key takeaway here. A rebranding like this is a huge signal for anyone watching. It shows the group isn't just trying to survive anymore. They are actively getting themselves ready for prime time. It's basically them putting up a giant sign that says, "We're open for business, ready for international backing." They're professionalizing their fight.
Okay, so let's pull back to the big picture again. What's the end game here? What's the ultimate goal of all of this? And more importantly, what are the real dangers of playing this long, grinding game of attrition?
This is where things get really, really messy, especially for neighbors like Pakistan. You get this thing called hybrid threat convergence. It's a fancy term for when criminal smuggling rings and ideologically driven militants start working together. The lines just get totally blurred. Suddenly you can't tell who's a freedom fighter and who's just a drug smuggler. And that creates this huge security vacuum that can suck the whole region down with it.
So, look, the analysis we're talking about is pretty sharp. It gets a lot right. The regime is durable, there has been a shift to attrition, but it might be underplaying a couple of key things, like the fact that Iran's Revolutionary Guard is incredibly experienced at crushing these kinds of insurgencies. And also, so far, these fights on the edges of the country haven't really sparked huge nationwide protests.
Which brings us to probably the single most important thing to understand about all of this. What's happening here is not about sparking a revolution to topple the government. No. It's a strategy of controlled destabilization. So at the end of the day, the goal is to bleed Iran dry, nice and slow. To keep testing its weaknesses, to keep it bogged down with problems at home, so that it's too busy and too broke to cause trouble abroad. And it's all designed to be a slow burn, carefully managed to stay just below the boiling point that would trigger an all-out war.
And that leaves us with a really chilling final thought from the source material. For the rest of the region, the biggest danger might not be the sudden, dramatic collapse of Iran. The real threat could be the slow, toxic leak of all this chaos and instability, spreading like a poison well beyond Iran's borders. A quiet, shadow war with consequences for absolutely everyone.